The air is dry, the kind that cracks your lips before noon. The soil beneath your feet is packed like old pottery, and each thrust of your shovel sends a dull vibration up your arms. You are not an explorer, not a man chasing glory, only a farmer from Lintong trying to coax water from a stubborn patch of land. The field smells of dust and clay, the ghosts of forgotten rains. Sweat trickles behind your ears as you strike again. Thud. The sound is wrong this time, not soft like earth, but sharp, hollow. You pause, the handle trembling slightly in your grip. Around you, the others keep digging, their chatter blending with the clank of metal and the rhythmic groan of wooden buckets. But you hear it again, that echo, like stone striking bone. You kneel, brush the surface with calloused fingers. Something cold and smooth hides just beneath the crust of dirt. You scrape away the soil, and the shape begins to appear. A nose, a mouth, eyes that seem to look back. Clay, but too lifelike. The features carry authority, the kind that commands even in silence. You whisper for the others to come. They gather, tools forgotten, leaning close as you uncover more of the buried face. The air thickens. Someone mutters a prayer. Another backs away, saying this is bad luck, that the ancestors sleep here. You laugh, but your throat is dry. The face grows clearer. It is not a mask. It is a soldier, sculpted from earth, yet watching you with the patience of centuries. A breeze rises from nowhere, carrying the scent of rain, though the sky stays clear. The wind brushes your cheek and stirs the dust around the hole. In that moment, you feel the weight of something vast below the suggestion of countless others buried in formation, waiting. You lean in closer, tracing the clay jawline, still damp with the memory of the craftsman's hands. The soil collapses a little more, revealing the curve of an armored chest, the hilt of a weapon, a regiment frozen in obedience. Someone whispers, "He's not alone." Your shovel slips from your fingers. The sound it makes when it hits the ground is swallowed instantly, as if the earth itself does not want it heard. You realize the field you've been digging is not empty. You are standing on the skin of an empire. Then comes the faintest echo from below. Not wind, not shifting soil, but something heavier. A hollow resonance that feels almost alive. And you know, without understanding how, that you have woken something that was never meant to be disturbed. Long before your shovel struck the earth in that distant field, another sound filled the valleys of the old Qin heartland, the clash of swords and the roar of victory. The man who commanded those armies was born in the 3rd century before the Common Era, in a world fractured by endless war. His name was Ying Zheng, though history would remember him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a united China. He ascended the throne at 13, and by the time he reached manhood, he had conquered the warring states, forging an empire that stretched farther than any before him. He built roads that carved through mountains and canals that mirrored the courses of rivers. He standardized weights, measures, currency, even the width of chariot axles, so that every road bore the same rhythm of power. The world, for a moment, bowed to order. Yet peace did not bring rest. The emperor feared death more than rebellion. His rule was absolute, but the thought of an end of breath ceasing, of silence after command, filled him with terror. Court alchemists promised elixirs made from jade, cinnabar, and gold dust, claiming they could outwit mortality itself. He drank them faithfully, unaware they were poisoning him slowly. As his empire expanded, so did his obsession. He dispatched fleets eastward in search of the fabled Isles of Immortals. He commanded scholars to find a formula that would preserve his soul forever. When they failed, he burned their books and buried their bodies. Knowledge was a threat to a man who wanted to be a god, and so he turned to something else: creation. If his body could not defy death, his empire could. He would build a second kingdom beneath the ground, a mirror of the one above, where he would continue his reign beyond the reach of time. An army would guard him, not of flesh and bone, but of clay and bronze, each soldier molded to stand eternal watch. Thousands of craftsmen and laborers were summoned from across the provinces. The project began in the foothills near modern Xi'an, where the earth was rich with fine loam ideal for sculpting. It would take decades, generations even, to complete. The emperor's court whispered that the construction site trembled at night, as if the underworld itself stirred with impatience. But the emperor smiled when he heard such things. To him, it was proof that even the gods knew his name. He did not seek peace in the afterlife. He sought dominion. And beneath that ambition, deeper than his tomb would ever lie, was a truth that no emperor dared to face. Immortality was not life everlasting. It was the fear of being forgotten. Imagine the sound. Thousands of hammers striking in rhythm, echoing through the valleys east of the Wei River. Smoke rises from kilns as far as the eye can see, each one glowing like a captured sundae. The emperor's command has reached every corner of the empire. Shape me an army that will never die. In the low plains of Lintong, entire villages are conscripted. Farmers become potters, potters become sculptors, sculptors become servants of the emperor's vision. The overseers move among them with scrolls in hand, measuring every limb and face, ensuring each figure stands in perfect alignment. You can almost see them, the artisans kneeling over damp clay, their hands steady but trembling beneath the watch of soldiers. The clay itself comes from the yellow earth of the region, mixed with fine silt and ground quartz to give it strength. When moistened, it smells faintly of rain and iron. Each warrior begins as a framework of straw and mud. Layers of clay are applied, smoothed, and carved with wooden tools. The sculptors press their thumbs into the clay to form cheekbones, eyelids, lips. Some add tiny imperfections, a scar, a furrowed brow, a smirk frozen in time, details that turn earth into humanity. It is said no two soldiers are alike. In the foundries, bronze workers cast swords and spearheads, the alloys mixed with tin to resist corrosion. Armor plates are cut and fitted for clay torsos. Horses are molded with wide, flaring nostrils as if they still draw breath. Chariots are assembled from wood and lacquer, painted in deep vermilion and black. The craftsmen whisper among themselves that these are no mere statues. The emperor's priests have spoken blessings over the kilns, calling upon ancestral spirits to inhabit the army once sealed underground. Each figure, they say, will rise when summoned, loyal beyond death. At night, the workers sleep beside their creations. Some claim to hear murmurs from within the rows of unfinished soldiers, like breath moving through clay lungs. Others dismiss it as exhaustion, the mind playing tricks beneath the glow of smouldering coals. But when morning comes, each figure stands firmer, as if time itself has hardened their purpose. The months turn to years, generations pass, children grow old beneath the dust of their father's work. No one remembers how many died before the last figure was set to dry. And when the final kiln door closes, the valley falls silent. The army stands assembled, thousands of faces, unique and unblinking. They are ready to guard their emperor in the world that awaits below. But none of the men who shaped them will ever live to see them again. At the center of the valley rose a man-made mountain, shaped to resemble the sacred peaks of the east. Beneath its slopes lay the emperor's true kingdom, sealed within the heart of the earth. The site covered nearly 40 square miles, an acropolis designed not for mourning but for rule. Every corridor, every chamber was planned with the same precision as his palaces above. Thousands of laborers dug deep into the yellow soil, carving halls wide enough to hold processions of chariots. The emperor's architects, scholars of geomancy and astronomy, aligned each chamber according to celestial constellations. They believed that the stars themselves must bow to his order, even in death. In the central chamber, artisans built rivers of quicksilver that mirrored the great waterways of the empire, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the seas beyond. Bronze pumps carried mercury through channels that glittered in torchlight, reflecting on walls painted with stars and mountains. The The ceiling shimmered with inlaid pearls that formed the heavens, each one placed according to ancient charts of the night sky. The tomb was guarded by mechanisms rumored to fire crossbow bolts at intruders. Ancient chroniclers wrote that traps were laid to protect the emperor's body, designed so cleverly that even centuries later no one dared open the inner chamber. Modern soil readings around the mound still revealed traces of mercury, giving weight to the legends. Beyond the burial mound stretched a labyrinth of ritual halls, servants of bronze, musicians of clay, acrobats frozen mid-gesture, an entire empire captured in silence. The emperor's world was replicated with terrifying precision, from stable hands to court officials, as if eternity itself were merely another province under his command. No one outside the project knew the full design. Those who labored closest to the burial chamber were sealed within it once their work was done, ensuring the emperor's secret world remained untouched. The sound of collapsing earth became their final song. Above ground, the mountain was covered with trees to disguise its true purpose. From a distance, it looked like a natural rise in the land. To travelers, it was simply another hill overlooking the plain. To those who knew, it was the center of the empire's most sacred lie. When the emperor finally died in the late 3rd century before the Common Era, his body was carried along the imperial road to rest within that hidden palace. Courtiers said the air grew heavy as the gates closed behind him, as though the earth itself had swallowed its master. And in the silence that followed, the first emperor's dream of immortality began its long sleep beneath the mountain of men. The final days of construction were carried out in silence. No music, no celebration, no imperial decree announcing completion. Only the slow grind of carts carrying soil and the muffled sobs of men who knew they would never leave the valley alive. The emperor's funeral procession arrived under a veil of night. Thousands of soldiers lined the route with torches, their flames bending in the wind as the coffin passed. Courtiers in black robes followed behind, chanting prayers written in the old tongue, their voices trembling as if afraid the emperor might still hear. The air was heavy with the scent of lacquer and wet clay, mingled with the metallic bite of mercury that seeped from the underground channels. Inside the tomb, the emperor's body was placed within a series of nested coffins, each sealed with resin and wrapped in silk. Artisans laid treasures beside him, jade ornaments, gold chariots, and scrolls of philosophy he had once ordered burned. The irony was lost on no one. In death, even destruction became an offering. When the final rites ended, the architects gave a signal. Great stone slabs were lowered into place, sealing the entrance to the inner chamber. The sound echoed through the tunnels, long and low, like thunder rolling through the belly of the earth. Outside, soldiers waited with drawn swords. The workers who had carved the tomb were summoned one by one to enter. They obeyed without protest. Many had families living within the shadow of the mountain. They bowed, stepped inside, and were never seen again. The historians who later chronicled the Qin dynasty wrote of this moment with caution. Some claimed that hundreds, perhaps thousands, were entombed alive to preserve the emperor's secret. Others believed they were executed afterward, their bodies buried in shallow trenches nearby. The truth is lost, but the silence that followed was total. When the gates were finally sealed, the emperor's generals stood in formation and saluted. The earth closed above them, layer by layer, until the mountain looked whole again. Within its heart, the emperor's army stood eternal guard, ready to march across the afterlife. In the years that followed, his dynasty collapsed. Rebellions rose like weeds, and the empire fractured once more. The mountain remained untouched, its secret sleeping beneath centuries of dust and myth. For more than 2,000 years, the world forgot what lay below. Empires rose and fell, kings burned cities, poets rebuilt them with words. But beneath the quiet fields of Xi'an, the emperor's command still lingered. His soldiers stood waiting, sealed in perfect silence, their eyes fixed forward. and the world above had no idea how close it stood to an army that had never died. Centuries passed above the buried army like waves breaking over stone. The once great Qin Empire splintered into chaos within a handful of years after the emperor's death. His son reigned briefly before the provinces rose against him, erasing the dynasty as swiftly as it had been born. Yet beneath the soil, the emperor's command still held. The mountain endured through storms and dynasties. The Han came, then the Tang, then the Ming. Each age layered its own dust upon the forgotten valley. The imperial roads turned to farmland, the rivers shifted course, and the names of those who built the tomb vanished from memory. Only the hill remained, silent and unremarkable, a gentle rise on the plain that farmers used to mark the boundary of their fields. Seasons changed endlessly. Spring winds brought the scent of plum blossoms, and autumn rains drummed against the earth that hid the emperor's legions. The roots of trees spread like veins through the old tunnels, touching the helmets of soldiers who had never moved. The clay faces, once painted in vermilion and jade green, lost their color to time. The pigments flaked away, leaving pale ghosts of what had once been lifelike skin. Insects nested in the empty hands of warriors. The breath of centuries dried the lacquered armor until it cracked like bark. Yet the forms remained intact. The clay that once held life now held patience, unbroken by the world above. Stories survived in fragments. Villagers told of strange lights over the fields on certain nights, of whispers that rose from the soil when the wind was still. Some believed the hill was cursed, a place where spirits guarded ancient treasure. Others avoided it altogether, saying the earth there was too hard, too dry, too full of memory to grow anything worth harvesting. Empires built walls, invented paper, and charted the stars. Mongol riders thundered across the plains. European merchants came seeking silk and porcelain. Still, the soldiers below did not stir. Theirs was a kingdom without sun, ruled by stillness. By the time the 20th century dawned, the mountain was no longer sacred. It was simply another landmark among the farmlands near Xi'an. Children climbed it in spring, chasing kites. Their fathers ploughed the soil that had once been the emperor's ceiling. The world had changed beyond recognition, yet somewhere in the quiet beneath their feet, the terracotta eyes still stared into the dark. The weapons still gleamed faintly in their resting places. For more than 20 centuries, the emperor's dream of immortality endured, not through spirit or soul, but through the patience of clay, waiting for a moment that would come by accident when the living once again struck the skin of the dead. It was the spring of the 1970s when the earth finally stirred again. The land outside Xi'an had been dry for months, cracked open under the Sunday. A group of farmers, desperate for water, chose a patch near the foot of an old hill that locals said was unlucky for planting. They carried wooden shovels and worn buckets, expecting nothing more than dust and sweat. The morning began like any other. The men joked between shovelfuls of dirt, their voices carried off by the wind. A radio played faintly from a nearby cart, singing about the harvest. Then came a sound that cut through it all, a sharp metallic thud, a hollow ring that did not belong to stone or root. The oldest of them, Yang Jifa, leaned down and brushed the soil aside. His fingers found something smooth. When he cleared more dirt, a shape emerged. A ridge, a cheek, a nose, too perfect to be chance. He froze. It was a face, not carved into rock, but standing free beneath the soil. By afternoon, they had uncovered more fragments, a chest plate, a broken arm, the edge of a helmet. The men argued whether to keep digging. Some whispered that it was an omen, a burial site best left alone. Others said it was worth something, perhaps old relics they could sell to a museum. Curiosity won. They dug until sunset, and by then they realized they were standing in the middle of something far larger than any grave. News spread quickly through the village. Officials arrived within days, followed by archaeologists from the Shaanxi Provincial Museum. The scientists stared at the fragments in disbelief. The detail was astonishing. The scale was impossible. Every unearthed piece hinted at a design so vast that no record in Chinese history had ever mentioned it. Within weeks, the site was declared an emergency excavation zone. Trenches were dug with care. What they uncovered would stun the world. Ranks upon ranks of clay soldiers standing in formation, silent as an army awaiting orders. The farmers watched from the edges of their fields as the pits grew deeper and wider. Cameras arrived. Reporters knelt in the dirt to photograph the faces of men long dead but somehow still present. The air buzzed with disbelief and reverence. No one could explain it. How had an entire army, sculpted in such detail, lain hidden beneath their feet for over 2,000 years? For the villagers, it was both miracle and burden. Their quiet farmland had become a gateway into history's deepest vault. And beneath their astonished eyes, the emperor's soldiers, those clay guardians of a forgotten god, had finally awakened. The archaeologists who arrived in the spring of 1974 had seen ruins before temples, tombs, the shattered bones of vanished dynasties. But nothing prepared them for what waited beneath the earth near Lintong. What the farmers had uncovered was not a single statue, nor a handful of artifacts. It was an entire army. At first, they thought the clay figures were scattered fragments. Then the excavation widened, and the truth began to emerge. The soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder in long corridors, arranged in perfect military formation. Each faced east toward the lands once conquered by the first emperor. Rows upon rows of silent men stretched farther than the eye could see. The lead archaeologist, Zhao Kangmin, brushed the dirt from a warrior's face and found eyes that seemed to return his gaze. The sculpting was astonishing, every hair of the mustache, every fold in the armor, carved with lifelike precision. Nearby, another team unearthed a horse with flared nostrils and a taut neck, as though still straining against an invisible rein. It became clear that the pit was only one chamber among many. Subsequent digs revealed others, each dedicated to a different division of the emperor's army. Some held archers kneeling in firing position. Others carried chariots drawn by clay horses. The layout reflected the structure of a real battlefield, a frozen moment of imperial power recreated beneath the ground. Chemical analysis of the weapons revealed something remarkable. The bronze blades were coated with a thin layer of chromium, a technique thought impossible before the modern age. After more than 2 millennia, the swords remained sharp enough to draw blood. The discovery forced historians to reconsider the technological capabilities of the ancient Qin engineers. And then came the colors. When the archaeologists first uncovered the statues, they still shimmered with paint, crimson robes, indigo armor, faces tinted with life. But the pigments vanished within minutes of exposure to air, crumbling like dust between the fingertips of conservators. In a breath, 2,000 years of color were lost. It was a reminder that even the dead are fragile when the world rediscovers them. As the excavation expanded, the scope became staggering. Thousands of figures, hundreds of horses, bronze chariots and weapons lay buried in a complex spanning nearly 4 acres. Modern imaging would later suggest that these pits were only part of a far greater necropolis stretching beneath the hill of the emperor's tomb itself, a labyrinth still unopened, still sealed by mystery. The realization struck every researcher the same way. This was not a monument to the past. It was the embodiment of one man's defiance of mortality. And in that defiance, the first emperor had succeeded. He had made time kneel. The first emperor's body turned to dust long ago, but his shadow remained. What he built to conquer death had, against all logic, survived it. The clay soldiers he commanded in silence now stood beneath museum lights, their faces reflected in the eyes of millions who came to see them. In his own time, Qin Shi Huang believed immortality meant ruling forever. He could not have imagined that 2,000 years later, his likeness would be studied, photographed, and revered by strangers from every corner of the earth. His power no longer came from armies or decrees, but from the awe his ambition inspired. When the pits opened to the public, visitors arrived from across China, then from around the world. Presidents, scholars, and poets walked through the excavation halls, gazing at the soldiers arranged in perfect lines. Children pressed their hands to the glass, whispering about which one looked like a real person they might have known. Each face seemed familiar and foreign at once, a bridge between centuries. The archaeologists realized something profound, that the emperor's quest for eternity had succeeded, though not as he intended. His spirit did not live on in elixirs or forbidden alchemy. It endured through the endurance of craft, through the fingerprints pressed into wet clay by artisans whose names were never recorded. In preserving his empire, they had preserved themselves. Scientific studies continued. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the warrior's age. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of ancient pigments. Infrared imaging mapped underground anomalies suggesting new chambers, still unexplored. Every discovery deepened the mystery instead of solving it. Even today, the emperor's actual tomb remains untouched. The outer mound, a broad hill covered in trees, rises quietly from the plains near Xi'an. Archaeologists hesitate to disturb it, fearing the traps described by ancient historians and the fragile state of what lies within. Soil samples reveal unnaturally high concentrations of mercury, lending chilling truth to the legends of rivers that flow beneath the tomb. The emperor had sought to master the elements, to make the heavens mirror his will. In a way, he had. His underground kingdom was both myth and reality, both triumph and warning. When night falls over the museum and the lights dim, the rows of soldiers stand in shadow again. Their faces soften, their armor fades into grey. It is easy to imagine them waking in that darkness, hearing distant drums from a world they once defended. Qin Shi Huang is long gone, but his dream remains alive not because he escaped death, but because death could not silence the story he left behind. And in that silence, eternity found him. Walk among them now. The rows seem endless. A forest of stone faces beneath dim light. Each figure stands life-sized, eyes fixed on an unseen horizon. Some bear the calm expression of discipline. Others wear the faint shadow of exhaustion, as if even in eternity they remember what it meant to serve. Historians have catalogued thousands of them, yet no two faces are the same. One soldier has a scar running along his jaw. Another carries the faint curve of a smile, proud and secret. The craftsmen who shaped them left traces of individuality, fingerprints pressed into clay, tool marks hidden beneath lacquer, imperfections that make them human. Archaeologists have identified ranks within the formations. Generals stand taller, adorned with elaborate armor and high knots in their hair. Archers kneel behind them, ready to fire. Cavalrymen grip reins molded from rope, their horses captured mid-motion. Even the soles of their shoes bear patterns, crafted with the same precision as their helmets. What strikes every visitor is the silence. It is not emptiness, but presence, the quiet weight of time compressed into stillness. These were not idols of gods, but representations of men, each shaped by another man's hand. Between them lies a connection that defies centuries. Creator and creation bound by duty, both lost to history, yet both preserved by it. In the preserved pits of Xi'an, humidity sensors hum softly. Conservators in white gloves adjust temperature monitors, ensuring the ancient clay does not crack. The soldiers, once made for war, are now guarded by scientists. Their enemies no longer armies but air and light. Cameras flash, visitors whisper, and still the soldiers do not move. And yet, standing there, it is impossible not to feel watched. Their gaze seems to follow, not in threat but in quiet endurance. The emperor built them to guard him, but they have outlived their purpose. They no longer serve a god, they serve memory. The artisans who shaped these figures are gone without names, their bones scattered or turned to dust long before the first dynastic cycle began again. But their work remains, carrying fragments of their lives in every curve and crease. Through their hands, immortality found a new form, not divine, not imperial, but human. Some say that when the museum lights dim, the soldiers breathe again. The air shifts, the dust stirs, and for a heartbeat, the centuries between life and clay vanish. Perhaps it is imagination, or perhaps it is the sound of history remembering itself. In those faces of silence, the emperor's dream has finally softened into something else, not power, not conquest, but witness. The witness of a world that once believed even death could be ruled. Night settles over Xi'an like a breath drawn slowly. The museum lights fade, leaving the clay soldiers in gentle darkness once more. Outside, the wind moves across the fields, whispering through the grass that grows where the emperor's builders once toiled. From a distance, the hill looks ordinary again, just a rise of earth beneath a wide Chinese sky. But deep below, the silence holds its own kind of pulse. The chambers remain sealed, the mercury rivers undisturbed. The tomb has never been opened, and perhaps it never will be. Some say the technology to protect what lies within does not yet exist. Others believe it should stay untouched, that the past must keep some of its secrets to remind us of what power can cost. Modern Xi'an hums with traffic and neon, a city of millions built over what was once the empire's heart. Yet every day, thousands still walk the corridors of the excavation site, moving among the soldiers who have not aged a moment in 2,000 years. They look, they whisper, they take photographs, and somewhere in that quiet reverence, the emperor's command endures. History has a strange way of keeping its promises. Qin Shi Huang sought immortality and, in a way, achieved it. Not through the elixirs that killed him, nor through the armies that obeyed him, but through the very fear that drove him the refusal to be forgotten. His empire fell, his palaces burned, but his army remained, patient as stone, waiting for the world to remember. If you listen closely, standing at the edge of the excavation pits, you might still hear it. Not the sound of war, but something deeper, the faint echo of hands shaping clay, of ambition pressing against the limits of mortality. It rises and falls like breath beneath the ground, reminding us that time does not erase what was once made with devotion or fear or hope. The emperor sleeps, the soldiers stand watch, and the earth, forever loyal, keeps their secret.